keep moving because it is a big day and we don't want to miss out on any opportunities to find out some interesting things from many of our speakers. Our next speaker is Stephen Harris. Stephen is the principal of Northern Beaches Christian School, but he's also the director and the founder of the Sydney Centre for Innovation in Learning. And some people here have actually been there and it's pretty awesome. Stephen founded the centre as an active innovation, research and development unit within the school. And his vision was to embed innovation into everyday practice. And that's a vision many of us share at SWSi. And after listening to David Borger today, I just think the innovation message is coming through loud and clear and how important it is. Stephen's presentation today is Invent the Future, and it's been included so that we can provide some inspiration and spark some ideas with you about how we can all contribute to inventing SWSi's future. So please welcome Stephen Harris.
Okay, now I think I'm mic'd up and I'm a wanderer, so I hope you can cope with that. I'm also at the back end of having a cold for the last week, so I've actually targeted my voice to this little hour, so hopefully it'll all last and things will be fine. It's great to be here today, and as I've said to a couple of people, I made the deliberate decision back in the 1990s as a deputy principal in a school who was responsible for senior students to go to a 3-year horticulture course at Richmond TAFE and get my qualifications through there. But I guess I did it for 2 reasons. I, at that time, owned a large property in the Blue Mountains, which was requiring gardening. And then also I wanted to become more familiar with the TAFE system so that I guess that integration between the school system and the TAFE system was far clearer in my mind. So I've always had a healthy respect because I love the course and recognise the strengths of the TAFE system. And I guess having come from the university system myself in terms of training and then teaching in kindergarten through to year 12, so a bit of everything. A bit about myself. Now I've put that there. I've just spent 3 weeks in Rwanda, so that I'm going to have a little bit of a Rwandan theme here because it actually ties in with inventing the future. I've been involved for the last 6.5 years leading a team who've got an education project in the northern section of the country. You can see a little bit of that with the lakes and the mountains on the right-hand side. It's not the Africa that's the desert and the plains. It's actually the lowest point of Rwanda is over 1,000 metres, and it goes up to Mount Karasimbi, which is about 400 metres higher than the top of Mount Cook. So it's actually, as a terrain, a little bit different. I've been in education now directly since I came out of university, too many years, so it's about 37 years, and at every level. And I guess with a very strong conviction that the process of change is not only necessary, but it's actually straightforward if our mindsets about the future sort of are all aligned together. I love this quote from Helen Keller. Life is either a daring adventure or nothing at all. Because I think as educators, we're the ones who've got the capacity in a community to take the lead and to do things a little bit differently. Now, so like it or not, our world is changing. You know, I think all of us are caught up in that process. I've done a little bit of extra reading in the last week prior to this talk. Just, again, going through some of the websites about the future, just really interesting, just to type in what will the world be like in 2025, and every time I do that, new stuff comes in. One little fact, which was interesting, I thought, I'm aware that they're creating autonomous vehicles and that they reckon that by 2035 that will be the predominant form of transport. Now, I'd thought that one through in the past, but I hadn't thought through this. In the United States, for men, the most popular job is truck driving. 2.9 million truck drivers in the United States. In the last year, Daimler and a couple of other companies have trialled their first autonomous truck. So as you start processing that one through, sometime in the next couple of decades, the most populated job for males is actually going to be completely replaced by autonomous vehicles. And again, as we start thinking through, we can drive, and I lived up in Springwood for 20 years, I can drive back to my street in Springwood and it still looks much the same as it did when I was there 20 years ago, and probably will look similar in 20 years' time. But it's the infrastructure behind our communities that is rapidly changing. I looked at 3D printing, and I know that last year I was aware that 3D printers can now print out a car chassis. That happened in Illinois last year. And I just happened across the website. I'm not a guitarist, but I've got lots of friends who are, wherever they go, they buy another guitar. And there's a New Zealand website selling 3D printed guitars. And they were extolling the virtues of why 3D printed guitars were better than the traditional versions. And that was quite an interesting talk in itself. So the world is changing. I'm going to jump across to Rwanda here for a little bit, just to highlight this point. So that's a very typical house being built in northern Rwanda. The government's actually provided the metal roof because that actually reduces moisture problems and then improves health for people. People have made their mud bricks, and it's a very typical style. That house would have 2 rooms typically, 1 room for sleeping, 1 room for just everything else that happens in the house. It's in an area where people are doing this every day, where they're lining up for their turn of the water. So it's, when you look at the infrastructure of the house and the water supply, it's probably fairly typical of that which we would expect in Africa. This is a pretty modern classroom. They've actually trialled in this design windows on both sides of the room, and they've got the bars on them to prevent break-ins, but also they haven't necessarily got glass in all of the places. But so there's quite a lot of light there, despite the fact that there's no electricity. That's actually a very well lit room. The blackboard's usable, and the teacher there has actually attended our workshops for the last 5 years, and they've done an amazing job creating spaces in their congested classrooms of 80 kids to then have at least a quarter of the space free. Very, very interesting. But that's a typical classroom. But this is perhaps what is not quite so known. This is Barak. Barak is my chief translator when I'm over there, because although the country is a dual language country between Kinyarwanda and English, up until about 10 years ago it was Kinyarwanda and French, and the government changed from French to English, which created a problem for the education system because about 90% of the teachers did not speak English, although their students were immediately assessed in English, and so there's a problem going through. Barak, his own father was murdered in the genocide. He was then protected in a food pit for 2 weeks by a neighbour. His mother took them to the DRC, survived for 4 years in the forests there, and then he's come back. He's now the top performing student at the university in the northern region. He can speak about 6 languages, and he can translate educational concepts just at the drop of a hat. He gets it. Amazing person. But what's also interesting, I keep bringing over my old devices. I gave him an iPhone 4, and he's now got. He didn't get rid of the other one, so it's he's having a conversation on the one hand, and then he's actually using the smartphone on the other. And then I gave him an iPad too as well, and he didn't actually have to come to me to actually ask questions about syncing it and working out how to use it. It was just intuitive. So here we are, in an area that I think technology has not reached. And what was really interesting is my friend Banner was born a refugee in Uganda. His parents fled the civil war in Rwanda in 1959, and his wife Jackie at the back, she was born as well into a refugee camp and lived for 15 years in the equivalent of a bark humpy, so that they came from a very, very difficult background. Banner, in fact, had to leave school at the age of year 8 equivalent, so his education had to cease then. What was interesting for Banner, who's now a very successful driver, he said he wanted to give a little bit of a speech to say thank you to our team at the end of it, and I had no idea what he was going to do, and out came the phone. And, and here he is, no prompting, using his smartphone with the speech or written on the phone as his tool. And I just thought, again, how many of us are thinking that adaptively the whole time? And here we are in a country that most people would sort of imagine is a backwater, but in fact technology is infusing that society at an amazingly rapid pace. The vision of the country is to turn it into the Singapore of East Africa, and so they're going full steam ahead for connectivity and changing the education system and a whole range of things. So I just thought that was probably quite a good little counterpoint to our society when we think about inventing the future, because it's not just us. And I guess the thing here is that we can turn what would be seemingly impossible into the possible if we actually have the tools and the mindset for that change. So why invent the future? I don't know about you, but these two images there capture a lot of our society. I know that when we were having breakfast in one of the guest houses, we were staying in Rwanda, and I had a team of 24, 12 of whom were senior year students and 2 ex-students. That they knew that they had 20 minutes in the morning over breakfast to get in touch with anyone in Australia. And that could have been, I actually have got a photograph, I didn't put it up, of sort of 20 people around the table, all with their and not communicating at all. We made the rule breakfast was okay to not talk because everyone was using that time, but we said at dinner time, let's put all of the phones onto the table so we actually at least talk to each other rather than actually getting completely drowned in that world. But how many times do you walk through a city or through on a train or anywhere and that is all you are seeing, people looking down? And why? Because suddenly there's a device that's actually replacing so many things. If I think back 10 years, I had a mobile phone, I had an alarm clock. I still have a watch, but I don't really actually need it, do I? I might have actually had a compass for bushwalking. I might have actually had a torch if I was going to go somewhere else. All of those things are now on one device. And how fast did that happen? It's happened in 1 decade. All of those habits have just disappeared. So let's go back a little bit. So we've already gone through that little period in history, which is it's irreversible. Now, what were we all doing in 1994 back in Rwanda? That was the genocide. That was an awful period of their history. What were we doing? I think I was aware that the technology was changing, and we'd already had computer rooms in schools where we sat very awkwardly around the outside and didn't know quite what to do. But this paradigm shift that occurred in 1994 meant that within 10 years, banks were completely disrupted. Now, I can't recall when I went into a bank last. I used to use a travel agent. Now I just do it all myself because it's pretty straightforward. You think about medicine. I used to have a family doctor in the mountains who I really respected, and he's a lovely gentleman, would be retired now. But if I was, I've actually had a melanoma. I went to a team of specialists who had technology and were able to pinpoint down to the last little gland where the issue was going through, so that things have changed. But in education, it's hit this wall. And I think that's partly because we're educated, but no one actually has spent time to think through what does this actually mean. Now, one of the interesting things going forward again from here is that a lot of the websites I've read have all said that we should expect that the next decade, in other words from now to 2025, there's going to be more change in our society as a result of technology than has actually been experienced in about the last 400 years. So that if we think we've gone through a crescendo, we're about to hit it further. And it's to do with things such as the nanotechnology, it's to do with things like 3D printers, it's to do with a whole range of technologies which are already out there. And I guess as bandwidth improves and all of those things change, there's this coalescing of all of these events is heading towards something that means we cannot look at our students and imagine that what was suitable 10 years ago is going to be suitable in 10 years' time. We cannot do that. This is an easy, some of you might have seen this beforehand. 20th century, information was pushed onto us. 21st century, we pull it in. What do I need to know? We pull it in, we crowdsource it. We've opened up a new building at our school last week, and I chose to use it yesterday as my space for work. Don't need to have an office anymore. There is no office for me. So I was working in the co-working space, and then I was trying to embed that little video from that little introductory slide, and all I had to do was turn around and just say, who here's used the latest MacBook Pro? Someone came over and showed me the swiping thing on that, and I said, I haven't actually used iMovie on this. Can someone show me that? Within 5 minutes, I actually had all the help just sitting around me. I didn't have to even go on the internet for that one. It's different. We all know this. We've moved from teaching to learning, teaching to teams, passive to active, batch to personal, management to engagement. But the big challenge is from control to empowerment. That is as relevant in kindergarten as it is through to tertiary, to TAFE, to university, because we have been completely conditioned to controlling things. Even down to a room like this, it's controlled. And that's where we've got to start shifting, because we're not going to, the subtleties of a technological revolution are such that the individual is empowered, and we have to respect that and work out what does that mean. And learning has already democratised. If we think that our curriculum or content is the key facet of our job, we're completely kidding ourselves, because I can go online and probably draw up 5 websites within 2 seconds that will actually give me more than someone's learnt in 3 years of university 20 years ago. It's completely different. And then if we think, okay, I've just mentioned 2025, let's go ahead from up there. The kids who are, I can't imagine what the world would be like for a child in kindergarten now when they graduate from their learning, their formal learning. Will TAFE be around at that point? Who knows? What's going to happen in terms of the accessibility of language and information? What's going to happen in terms of different cultures? If I can actually speak in English and I can actually understand someone else speaking to me in a foreign language because of something I'm wearing or listening to, or however it's going to happen, this is all ahead of us. But what's interesting, a couple of the reports that are around from McKinsey, big one, clearly there's a growing mismatch between what is required in the 21st century workplace and the focus of the education systems preparing young people for the workforce. It's very much so in Europe. When you look at the unemployment figures across Europe, we know that Greece and Spain are in bad straits, where you're talking over 50% of the population of the younger people who are unemployed. But when you have a look at even Germany and the UK and elsewhere, in terms of people who have not been adequately prepared for the workforce, you're starting to talk 60, 70%. So you're starting to get a minority who are ready for the workforce. I looked up a couple of other websites. Again, this one, singularityhub.com. Again, this is one of those that's sort of making the constant comment that this rate of change is just going to increase. Another one here from anything that the Pew Research does from the US is always an interesting read. And I like the fact that when they talk through here, there's an assumption that it's already gone. If you read through the first part, when the talking head expert teacher model of education is displaced by technology, it's not if, it's when. And again, if we are imagining that our standard classroom practice is actually going to survive, it's not. It's actually already gone. The problem is that many of us haven't understood that in quite the same way. But we don't need to get panicky. We don't need to sort of start thinking about this future shock and that we're going to get exhausted by change. If we start getting a few tools, and I guess that's the point of what I want to talk about now in the next half hour. There's some very, very easily found statistics on southwest Sydney, and a little bit, I was speaking up in Queensland about a month and a half ago, and the statistics for some of the regional areas of southwest Queensland were equal to the worst of Tasmania and equal to the hardest areas in Sydney. And the statistics were all fairly similar, that we're talking up, around 20% of young people cannot get employed. And that should be a worry to us, because then you think about, okay, if you've got the unemployed, then you have the underemployed, then you have the misemployed. Put those three people together and you're probably going to get 50 to 60% of your suburb. And that's where we actually have to start thinking through. And, it's... I can't look at those figures and think there's nothing that I can do, because there are things that we can do. And I guess that comes down to us, educators. We're the ones who understand the value of education. We're the ones that can open the door. Let's switch back to Rwanda, and there's a new technical college being opened up in the northern province there called Muhabura. And what struck me was we were there on a public holiday. We were then asked, these students knew that the teachers wouldn't be coming because it was a public holiday. That was fine. They knew that we were in a hotel nearby, and they actually said, can you come and run a workshop for half the day, because we don't want to waste a day. And I just thought, how many Australian kids would be saying, we're desperate to learn and we'll do anything. We will sacrifice everything else, because in those villages that they come from, they only spend money on their device, on the connectivity. They will get their clothes somehow. They will grow their own food. They will, they'll sell cattle to then get money for a college fee. If you give them money, they will go to the local internet cafe and they will spend it there because they want to learn English. Now, Alvin Toffler said this back a couple of decades ago now, the 21st century is about learning, unlearning and relearning. And that's our journey. And again, it's not a negative thing. It's just a mindset. 30 seconds now. Just jot down any thoughts in your book or have a conversation with a neighbour just very, very quickly. Anything that sprung to mind from that first little session. Any thoughts that you've got? Any questions that have immediately come in? Okay, you can keep writing or thinking through as I keep moving ahead now, but I want to keep our thinking pushing through. So it is time to create a new picture. That's the reality of what we're doing. But I mean, money-wise, you can't just suddenly create a new picture out of nothing. We've actually got to adapt the current picture. And again, some of you will be aware of this, some of you won't. I'm just going to have a very quick overview about my background at Northern Beaches and also the Sydney Centre for Innovation and Learning, SCIL. So we're a K-12 school. We've got 1,300 kids. We constantly have that mindset that we're learning from others. We hold very high expectations of ourselves and our students, and we question absolutely everything. So that we've got no fears on that. If some things will change overnight, an example of this one, we think that sometimes terminology is crazy. I mean, why call a lesson at school a period when it's got so many gender connotations and industrial connotations and everything else? And so we just got rid of that overnight. We just said, let's get rid of that. Let's just turn it to learning session. In other words, some things are easy to change, other things take time. But we question everything. We're a multi-screen day. How many of you here have got one device with you at the moment? You've got a mobile phone, nothing else. How many have got a mobile phone plus a laptop or an iPad? How many have got 3 devices? Yeah, that's not unusual. And you've got 4 because you've got the big screen here as well. Okay, so we live in a multi-screen day. And whether it's the phone, whether it's the iPad, but certainly there'll be large screens around that we're actually watching and looking at multiple times. So that's the environment that we've set up at school. We have that business-oriented lens, constant improvement. In other words, that's our mindset. It's not what we've done in the past. It's what can we change today? What can we change in order to promote better learning? That's the question that we ask the whole time. we've started changing all of our spaces from kindergarten to year 12 to try and match what does a professional space look like. That's an interesting question for kindergarten, because kindergartens don't go into professions other than play. So therefore, our kindergarten spaces actually allow for that. They allow choice, play and creativity. So therefore we've actually had to think about that. It's not don't write on the table, it's use this table to write on because you can. It's a good space to sort of come up with your drawings. And we operate in 3 horizons, and I'm going to talk more about that shortly. Some people think it's a little bit like that, creating our own pathway ahead, but in my mind it's this. It's fun. We're walking into a territory where we are creating the field for ourselves. So we were founded in 2005 for the Sydney Centre for Innovation of Learning. It's all of those things. It's a strategy, it's future focused, it's an accelerator, and it's deliberately unclear. But I'm going to show you some images now, but in showing you the images, change is not about the space, it's actually about the mindset and the pedagogy entirely. If you can't change the pedagogy wherever you are, then you're going to struggle. But we think of space in 5 different dimensions: physical, virtual, pedagogic, emotional and relational.
When it comes to our schools, there's always debate about class sizes and homework. Tonight, we can take you inside a Sydney school that has flipped traditional theories onto their head with more than 100 kids per class. Ellie Southwood has the story.
They were wrong, it's 180.
Welcome to the Zone at the Northern Beaches Christian School. 180 kids across years 5 and 6 in one learning space led by a team of 6 teachers.
We're more like a coach or a mentor because they're not waiting for us to deliver stuff to them.
Every wall can be written on and there's no such thing as a teacher's desk.
So we've got a wide variety of places to sit on, like couches, bean bags.
And homework has a different name, pre-learners, where kids prepare for class instead of repeating it afterwards.
And so each of those teachers is now working with a group that's been sorted according to
so I had to
how
think
they
about,
went with the
as a
pre-learner,
principal,
where
how did
are
I
they
feel
on
about
that
a
spelling
student lying
journey
on a
for this
beanbag?
week.
It helps my learning by knowing that
child with ADHD,
I have choice.
Why not?
Not one student's been sent to the principal's office in 5 years.
Behavioural issues have become almost a thing of the past.
Music lessons too aren't in the classroom, they're on stage.
This is showbiz right here.
Every class finishes with a gig.
We're not preparing for the music industry, we're in the music industry right now.
There's no canteen, instead Blue Sky Cafe, an independent business where kids, parents and visitors can have a coffee anytime.
One thing you notice here is there's no school bell, no alert telling kids when to move on. Instead, it's up to the students themselves to use their watches and phones to get where they need to be on time.
And that's the end goal, kids who take responsibility for their own learning.
If you can engage the kids, involve them in the collaborative process, they will rise to the challenge.
Ellie Southwood, 10.
Okay. That was very nice of Channel 10 to give us promotion on their major news when we actually weren't expecting that at all. But it was interesting to sort of see the questions that the reporter had, because she couldn't get her head around the idea of no bells. And I said, it was fine. Every child's got the mobile phone. They're going to know what the time is. And all you've got to do is put a nice comfortable couch into a classroom and they'll all run to the classroom to get that couch first. Going through. But we actually view space now, whilst we do have sort of about 50 formal spaces in the school, we view them through this lens. They're either campfires, watering holes, caves, sandpits, digital space. So we look at space from a different perspective. So every classroom is not going to be a mirror repeat of the other classrooms, that there becomes choice. We look at concepts of, well, what type of tables work best. In fact, we worked out that round tables actually weren't as efficient as these tables because people could actually sit closer. And it was actually more conducive to having smaller groups working in a plectrum-shaped table than it was in a round table. Any wall that we could turn into a writable surface, that meant that we had to say, well, what do we do with posters? Well, A, we get rid of them because they never got changed, or B, we put them onto the digital realm. We created these cloud tables, and we've now got about 8 of those in the school, that they're very effective for junior secondary, which is interesting, and also for adults. That they're the 2 groups that come straight to the cloud tables and use those. This just gives you a bit of an idea. We have actually opened this area called Manhattan in the City last week, or the week before last. So this is brand new for us. This is the SCIL building. You walk into the SCIL building, it was going to be a library. We've changed it so it's a sequence of spaces that can be used by teachers and students in a variety of ways. It's open in the morning before school, it's open at lunchtime, and it's open after school, and it's like a giant lounge room. You know, kindergarten through to year 12, just as happy to be in together. Our design centre, we've got a design and production suite. Keep using old items like a whiteboard. A maths, we looked at the idea of what would a maths classroom look like if it was actually done differently, and we worked out that it needed to have both an informal and a formal section, and it needed to be able, you can write anywhere, so that's that same space. That's the music space. So that the teachers worked out in music that you didn't need to separate out 2 grades, that you could actually operate 2 classes simultaneously, both teachers actually stretching from their own class into the other class, and that they've got a little Genius bar on the right-hand side at the back there, so that every child is having a session of expert tuition during that time going through. So these are some of the choices that teachers made. They wanted walls removed, they wanted to teach classes together, they didn't want storerooms, they wanted everything to be repaired so you didn't actually have to hide broken stuff away. They wanted to co-teach things. So the list here it's evolved from what the teachers want as they experiment. Now, about 8 years ago, I had this idea. I was speaking in Barcelona, and I was at the airport for about 8 hours in the afternoon. And I looked at the Barcelona airport, and it's this giant canopy with amazing acoustic facilities. It's all glass and tiles, but it's not deafening. And I thought, what would happen if you brought all of the function of a school under one giant canopy? And then we come up with this crazy brief, a building to be as high and as wide as possible, formal and informal, inside, outside, outside, inside. I horticulture, I love gardens, so I wanted to have gardens. We wanted air and space, because we're told that kids think better with air and with space. And we wanted to teach kids sustainability and awareness. The architects came back with reinventing our vision and said that they would create a canopy to protect, nurture and grow learning like none other. And I said, well, I want it designed entirely around relationships, community, learning, but not classrooms. So what would happen if that whole building was based around that? Well, they came back with this plan, the most amazing plan, and I looked at it and I said, there's no wall on 3 sides. I'm used to building buildings with walls on them, and that was the first thing that stretched my mind. And it works perfectly. It's very, very interesting, having seen going through that brave step. The roof, we actually harvest the electricity, the solar power, and also the water. And so we create 2 complete ecosystems for the school, with the water and the power coming from the building itself. Now this was created in December for us. I'm not going to show the whole of it, but this is a digital version of what it would look like. What's amazing for us now, except for the fact that that little entrance sign is to the side, it's actually almost identical to this as of 2 weeks ago. We've just opened it up. So there are gardens all through it. There's 3 distinct separate buildings, but it's built around the notion of community and co-working space, and that as learners, whether we're students or adults, we can actually work together and we can choose the space that's relevant to our learning, and teachers can at any time find spontaneous space. So if they decide they want to come out of their classroom without shifting furniture and everything else, they will always be able to find somewhere in this space because it's open. That giant screen is about to get installed next week, so that's quite exciting for us. The cafe is now the lower level of that central treehouse. There's bridges connecting it through. The kids can't decide if it's Star Wars or Lord of the Rings. That's where their minds are at when they sort of see it. This space is used by multiple grades, primary and secondary already, even within a week and a half. And then it gets around to this working space. The central part of the building was designed around the notion that if we brought senior students, staff and external startups into the one space, we could invite companies to come and have free space, what would happen? Now this is the building as of this last week. So it's finished, the gardens have just been installed. I'm thinking it would be quite a nice art gallery around that little canyon space. You can see up the cloud, it's got this misting system. The water comes from the roof down through inside the columns to underneath the ground, and then we can push it back as mist back over the plants, and also to temper the temperature in the hotter months going through. It's all based on just straight sustainability features. We thought these little timber constructions were actually more useful than a table for kids, because they can just climb over them because they jump on tables anyway. So why don't we build them something that they can sit on and stand on all at the one time? But we actually have got the cafe areas. But this is the co-working space. We can seat 180 in the different areas. Students now, and they've done it immediately, they can choose, do they need to have a solo space, a silent space, a group space, or a team space? What do I need? Where do I go? What's going to work for me? So we've created the furniture and then the thinking. But it's interesting. After we built it, I read this quote: in rooms with higher ceilings, people are 25% better at seeing connections between seemingly unrelated subjects. It's nice to build a building and suddenly find the research to justify it afterwards going through. The other thing we're actually working on at the moment, the final bills are all coming in. We might be doing this for less than the DEC per square metre cost. Now that's the other thing we're actually having to verify as we go through. So again, it's an interesting one for governments to think through, that it's possible to build something quite different. Here's some other interesting quotes. Ophthalmologists recommend distant views and views of nature to provide needed breaks from close work and restore students' ability to concentrate. I'm sure my vision has not been aided by a computer screen being near me for 20 years that far away. It makes sense. Let's just go back to the other one. Okay, Salford University reckons that the environment can affect progress by up to 25% per year. 75% of variation in pupil performance can be explained by the built environment. That was from the Salford one. This is from another American one. 15% of every room that we come into, 15% of us are affected by the air quality right at this moment. So some of you will be struggling with concentration because you're either sitting in too hot, too cold, or too stuffy. 20% of students are affected by the lighting of a classroom. That this is slightly dulled lighting. That's switching off everyone's brains so that this afternoon you're all going to fall asleep. Now this is an interesting one as well. That the group work's great, but students teaching each other is actually where the most powerful learning will occur. Do our spaces allow for that? Do we allow for that? So where to from here? Well, we're the ones that have to lead and shape the future as we invent the future now. So we have to create plans, but the absolutely critical thing here is that the guiding vision. Now, I've heard a little bit about the guiding vision for SWSi at the moment, but every subgroup of people have to have a strong guiding vision that gives you the purpose as to why do you come to work every day. For me, if I look at those statistics of unemployment and think I'm an educator, I'm lucky I have a job, my guiding vision is to say I can do something that might open up the chance for employment for hundreds of kids, or even, I regret as an adult that I didn't get involved in going to Africa until I was in my 50s, because I think, boy, what would I have done if I'd done that in my 30s or my 40s? It's an interesting thought. So you want to be able to describe the vision, create the plan, and select some tools. And I'm going to give you those tools just in the final 10 minutes as we go through. And I'm just going to introduce you to them. I'm not going to explain them in depth. That's another beautiful picture of northern Rwanda. That's Mount Muhabura. That's where the RPF, the force that actually ended the genocide, hid on that mountain up the top as they were training. You can see why it was a natural fortress. Uganda's on the right-hand side, these lakes through. But I thought, the three horizons there perfectly described. Where I'm standing, my vision was exactly on not falling off the road as I took a photograph. So that the immediate horizon was the one that was critical to my actual activity at that time. And we should never get sidetracked by the beauty of the furthest horizon, because we actually need to live in the first horizon. That's where we are now. But then the middle horizon that I can see, that's enticing. I want to get there. I want to go by boat. I want to walk. I want to go round to those little peninsulas and to see what's there. There were fishermen. There were things happening. I could see that, so I could actually plan that. I could plan on my return journey to come back through there. And that distant horizon is like that beautiful thing that I think, okay, that's where we're heading, and I have to have a clear picture of that, but I'm not living there. I'm heading there. That's where we're heading towards. So this notion of the three horizons, and if you typed up three horizons into Google, you'll find all of the stuff easily. So it's horizon one is the incremental innovation. It's what you do day in, day out just to change things. It's whether you change a table and a chair. It's whether you shift your workspace. It's those things. Horizon 2 is the semi-radical and disruptive innovation. It's when you're identifying new ideas, new products, new trends. And then the Horizon 3 is the mainly radical breakthrough. It's the creating the future. So you're living in three horizons in the one picture. That's why it's important to go back. It's the one picture, but the three horizons. If you're talking about timeframes, other websites will add this to it. That Horizon 1 is talking about this next year. Horizon 2 is the next 2 or 3 years, and Horizon 3 is beyond that. Now, I would say don't do any planning beyond 3 years now, because technology is going to change so fast that it'll be out of date. So perspectives on changing culture. This is where the Denizen model is quite useful, and that bottom one you might be able to see is mission, adaptability, involvement, consistency. So if you typed up Denizen's model of organisational culture, this one's really, really useful. In that circle, they've got the external focus and the internal focus, so that an organisation at all times has to have that dual focus. Okay, we live in a world where we've got the organisation, so obviously internally we have to be focused on things, but we're actually servicing an external population. And so therefore our adaptability is critical. I mean, you could talk to me about how I felt on Sunday night with my ISP provider, who was based in South Africa, who had put me on hold for 3 hours to get through. How did I feel by the time I came through with their customer focus when they told me there wasn't a problem, and I said my phone line was dead. That their customer focus was not strong on that night. But the mission is critical as well. That vision, the goals, the strategic direction and tension, that's what we drive outwardly. It's what we feel when we walk into a space. Internally, though, the one down here that really struck me last year, we've got empowerment, team orientation, capability development, core values, agreement going through. The word consistency. If I have a student coming into our school, I don't want their experience of education to be inconsistent because of the different adults that they're confronting. Because we're the employees and we have the capacity to be consistent. We actually have to leave aside, we have to dump the emotional baggage that we might come into school with, so that we can actually meet each child fresh and actually have a consistent experience for them. They don't need to know that I'm tired, they don't need to know that I've got a cold, they don't need to know that I had frustration with my ISP provider, because that's not their world. And I'm not employed to do that. I'm actually adult and professional, so therefore I've got to be able to walk into a team context. Okay, another very useful tool, you can type this one up again from Noster, K-N-O-S-T-E-R. I've tweeted this one around, but it's basically this little formula: vision, buy-in, skills, incentives, resources, action plan equal change. But what's fascinating here is that when you lack one of those components, what is the human emotion? Now, without vision, we're going to be confused. Without buy-in from the team, someone's going to sabotage it. Without skills, there's going to be anxiety because we can't do it. Without some level of motivation and incentive, there'll be resistance. If I don't understand about the unemployment in this area, I'm not going to buy in or have the incentive to do these things. If I haven't got the right resources, I'll get frustrated. And if I haven't got an action plan, I'm going to feel like a mouse on a treadmill going through. So Noster's plan there is actually very, very helpful. So I'm just introducing you to these ideas. This one here is really, really helpful as well. The book's not that expensive on Amazon. Accelerate by John Cotter, who's the head of the business school at Harvard. So he's describing the way in which an organisation can free itself up into the future. And he's saying that the 20th century hierarchy is absolutely still critical, but the network alongside of it, like a dual operating system, like a computer that works Mac and Boot Camp together, is what's critical. So that the hierarchy ultimately exists to support the network's vision. That's the simplest way of reading that one. And now the thing is, the network's vision is created by any individual in the community who wishes to drive that vision forward. So if you've got a person who does not think life through that lens of vision, that's fine. They are extremely useful in the hierarchy for the organisation, but that person should not frustrate the vision. So if we get this, and Cotter's book, very simple to read, is quite powerful because it meshes beautifully the idea of a network and the hierarchy together. Future Work Skills 2020, this was written back in 2011. Very interesting list here. I'm going to go through them fast. You're going to touch on this one this afternoon, I think, with 21st century productivity. But, these are the skills that people are saying are critical. It's not just the 4 C's of communication, critical thinking, creativity, etc., etc. Sense-making, social intelligence, novel and adaptive thinking, cross-cultural competency, computational thinking, new media literacy, transdisciplinarity. And Finland's just shifted into that one. It's very, very interesting that they've made that jump. A design mindset, cognitive load management. How do we go home after a day like today and manage ourselves? Is that a skill that we're good at? Or do we get burdened by it? Have we experienced virtual collaboration? That's a great list of skills. Again, you can find those ones. We won't go into how you rate. But basically, this is my message. If as educators we're not prepared to initiate significant transformation now in order to best meet current known context, then we've already failed the next generation and those to come. Because if we can't do it now for those in front of us, how on earth are we preparing it for those who are going to come in 5-10 years' time? Going through. So what needs changing? We're going to I won't give you time to write just yet. We've got to bring pieces together. Now this is pretty simple. An individual with an idea, you can change things. With a team, you have a project. Add vision into it, you're on a journey. Add a team with vision and an idea, that's when you start transforming. You need to get everyone together. And I know that the session this afternoon is on Teams, or the one after me, sorry, is on Teams. That's perfectly timed because that's where transformation starts with people. And you've got to have that purpose, you've got to have a plan, and you've got to have passion. If you lack any of those, it's not going to change. So you have to have a team of people, shared purpose, clear plan, and growing passion. In the next session that you're about to do, start thinking through who is your team, and it's not your entire faculty. It's actually the 4 or 5 people of any age who motivate you to lead the change. That is your team. So as you think that one through, you've got to have a strategy. We use this strategy. We do a lot of observation. We then create vision. That vision has to grow immediately, and I have to allow any person to grow it. Otherwise, it's not vision. Out of that comes ideas. Then we put them into action. Then we evaluate it, and we start the cycle again. It starts with transforming ourselves. It starts with the notion that I can build the capacity of every person that I meet, whether they are a student, a parent, or another colleague, or myself. That it's critical that we actually think about that we're not complete. We haven't come along and there's nothing else that we can learn. We've got to shift to this thing called coaching. What does that look like? Well, I know what it looks like in the sports field. What does it look like in the classroom? I'm not completely sure yet, but I've actually got to work towards that. But, I actually want to have collaboration coaches in my school, people whose job it is to walk around every day and to help encourage collaboration. And I know that that's a theme in your next talk about the importance of collaboration. I actually want to have pedagogic coaches. We've already got this. People whose jobs it are, that they might teach physics and something else, but they've also got the capacity to sit alongside any other teacher and not threaten them, and just to help them to help change their pedagogy, like a coach. The ability to come into any person's room and to say, we're in this team together. and a sustainability coach. Now, for all of our rhetoric about the environment, our kids are still hopeless at dropping rubbish, but you know what? The staff are as well. They're just as bad as the kids when it comes down to it. What's the most difficult thing? It's the one that you're about to tackle in the next session, collaboration. So my encouragement for you is to collaborate as if you're in a team, following where the ball is about to go. You know, if we were in a football game, a soccer game together, and a person stopped before the goal to get my approval as captain to kick the ball, that person's on the bench next week. Okay, so that when we're collaborating as a team, we have to trust each other. The team is far more important than the individual. And we have to follow where the ball is about to go, not where it is. And can you describe, and you're about to have this session coming up, but what is your team like? What's the DNA? Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it thriving, growing, or is it toxic? And what can you do about that? We actually have this rule now that every time a new team is created, we actually have an essential agreement conversation. So we sit down and we talk about what's our essential agreements as we work together. And then every time a person changes in that team, the essential agreement has to change because it's a different dynamic. Okay, this is when you start. And a final quote from me: you cannot jump a chasm in 2 little steps. And if you're at all interested, you're welcome to come and visit the Sydney Centre for Innovation and Learning. You just make contact with us via the website, scil.com.au, and we're actually going to be offering Twilight Tours of the new building this term, because we know that there are a lot of educators that want to come through and see what we've just opened up. So that if you're interested in that, let's just come through in the afternoon at 4 o'clock and to have a look. We've also got an opening of the new space on the 26th of August, going from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. in a festival we're calling DIG, Design, Ideate and Grow. It's going to be a combination of like TED-style talks plus music, and it's just a time to actually try out the building, see what happens. Any questions? No time. Question up the back, yes. Yes, yes.
Sharon from HR. I'd be really interested in your opinion if you believe that the vision and the environment that you've created at the school have then attracted the workforce to enable them to deliver on that, or has the environment and the vision you've created at that space enabled people to step up to work differently or work more innovatively?
Okay, it's done both of those plus one other. It's meant that some people have left because they didn't like it. It's enabled many people to step up because we have an expectation that anyone can step up, but it's also attracted people in who want to join that vision. Yeah, and so we've actually looked at our employment processes to make sure that people don't get culture shocked by thinking they're coming to something that's, if they're not used to speaking in a transparent space, you're coming to the wrong place, because that's our immediate expectation. But I could answer more questions on that later if you wanted to. There are now a number of other schools who are doing similar things. I mean, at Claremont College, Randwick Way is doing similar things. There are multiple places. There's also a number in New Zealand. New Zealand's actually quite... I visited one last week called Stonefields. There are schools in the US and in Denmark and in Finland and in the UK, all on a similar journey. The encouraging thing for me is that when we visit those schools, we find a very similar mindset, plus also similar solutions. The school that's most like us happens to be in Barcelona. That was completely ironic because I didn't actually know them when I went there the first time. It's called Col·legi Montserrat. It's a Catholic college. They run by a group of fearless nuns who will do anything to actually help the kids improve their learning. Yeah.
Sadly, we've run out of time. It's pretty fascinating stuff. But certainly, if you have questions and you put them on those post-its, we can make sure that they reach Stephen and SCIL, and we would then be able to post some of the answers on the SWSi Share forum site, post-forum. But it doesn't end here. First of all, I'd like to thank Stephen, and if you could join me in thanking him, that was wonderful.